Okay, guys, next we got Dale Chrystie with FedEx. Let's give him a warm welcome, guys.
Thank you. Oh, I've got the clicker, I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to get the clicker here. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm going to stand way over here so you can see the slides and stuff. I'm Dale Chrystie. I'm a business fellow and blockchain strategist for FedEx. I bring you greetings from Memphis, where we have pork barbecue, and we'd love to welcome you here. Lots of good barbecue and lots of good food in Memphis, so I'm happy to be here this morning. Because I work for a company that goes to 220 countries and territories, our default position is essentially the International Space Station. So today, for my next 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, I'm going to take you from where you are and what you do on a daily basis up with me into the International Space Station. And so, let's see if we can get that. Not clicking. There we go. Thank you. So again, most people here are focused on a company or they're entrepreneurs or they're enthusiasts or whatever the case may be, and some might be focused on an industry. In this case, we go everywhere you can go. So FedEx, UPS, DHL, we all go to 220 countries and territories. I led the first blockchain use case at FedEx in 2017. We were trying to focus on a quality control issue, a three-party scenario where we were essentially talking past each other. And it led us into a number of things. But during that period of time, little by little, I had to start realizing this thing is so big, I need to keep pulling back and pulling back and pulling back. So if the next 20 minutes or so, we're all looking at it from this angle, at this level, there is no FedEx. There is no industry and there are no borders. And this data, what we're talking about with Web3 and blockchain, data knows no geographic borders. And so for it to scale in global commerce, it's going to have to be this large. And I know that kind of gives headaches to a lot of people that are focused in a certain area, but just allow me a few minutes to kind of go into that space from that point of view, if you will. And the word I'm going to use shortly is the word co-opetition. We think it's going to take a pro-competitive global village to scale blockchain. That means FedEx, UPS, DHL. That means other true competitors are going to have to sit at the same table. It's not about where we compete, it's about where we can agree. And so at that level, it's a very different focus. So we work with UPS, we work with DHL where we can in a pro-competitive manner. Things like standards and many other things as well from that point of view. So that's the space I want to take you into, if I can, for a little bit. Again, this is not responding, so if you can, there you go, thank you. So as far back as early 2018, our CEO and founder, Fred Smith, walked out on the Consensus New York stage, which was early days for this, and he and our CIO walked out, and he basically just kind of dropped a whole box of microphones on the stage and said, oh, this isn't any big deal, it's just going to completely change worldwide supply chains. And he went on further to say, if you're not at the edge of innovation and technology, you need to be prepared to be commoditized or potentially to become extinct. And needless to say, that's not typical for a founder and CEO of an iconic brand to be that candid about where this is going. And so I share some of these quotes because you can have a lone evangelist at a company, and that person can be knowledgeable and enthusiastic and you know, all those things. But when you say, look, the C-suite, the corner office is also, they get it, they understand it, they can speak to it as well. It's an entirely different level from that point of view. And you'd have to have that in order to get the kind of broad discussion and broad topics that we have, the kind of shadow that can be cast, if you will. On the right side, we also realized by the following year, and said it publicly in early 2019, that for blockchain to scale, it has to be bigger than us. The translation of that is that we can't slap a FedEx logo on it and make money on it. And a lot of people have been trying to make money on this for a number of years, right? Let's just get some smart people and we'll sign on disclosures and we'll just all get rich. Well, we don't think that works in that case. We don't think UPS would pay us to use our blockchain and vice versa. We think we have to work our way through those things. But it really led us to this fork in the road that said, look, if you're trying to get rich quick on one side, again, you could get 60 or 80 people to sign non-disclosures in certain industries, maybe the US healthcare industry or something like that. But in global commerce, it's millions of entities all the way to a bicycle delivery company, and it's gonna have to work for them. They don't have IT departments, they don't have any of that stuff. So whatever scales ultimately is gonna have to fit into that space from that point of view. And so we think we've spent, and I would even say wasted a lot of years focusing on who, what, and when. So who, FedEx, what, blockchain, when, we're all trying to figure that out. When in fact, I think that the actual piece of this that's most important is actually why. And that's the language I think at the enterprise level we're gonna have to speak. I have to be fluent in business speak to have a conversation with the chief financial officer to say, I can't walk in and say, wow, this is peer-to-peer. Don't you understand how cool that is? And smart contracts, boy, they're gonna be changed. They don't care. That's not the language they speak. They're focused on risk and opportunity and fiduciary responsibility. And in this case, I have to be bilingual. I have to be fluent in the language of business. So if I can walk up to the chief financial officer and say, by the way, if you're trying to reduce your receivables, let's say you have an average receivables right now 40 days, if we could get it to 39, would that be of interest to you, or 38? Now you have their attention. That's what they're trying to accomplish. Well, what about zero? What about a net zero? Would that be of interest to you? Now we're talking about smart contracts. We don't have to call it that. We don't even have to use the B word, blockchain. Increasingly, I don't think we are going to use it. I think it's just simply going to be a trusted layer under everything. A 10-year-old today is going to live in a world where it's simply a trusted layer under everything. And so, yes, it's a technology, who, what, and when, but it's really more than a technology. That gets you to culture, that gets you to a number of other things, where people are going to have to work together on a new technology that nobody's familiar with, and we're working our way through that at this point in time. So this is a slide that I think is really representative maybe of this entire presentation, which is, if I ask most of you, if I ask most people that work for FedEx, what does FedEx do? We think of ourselves as a technology company, but most people would simply say, well, I ordered something and they picked it up and delivered it. That's fair. That's the left-hand side of this slide. That's the physical world. And you can see as far back as 1978, I'm not going to ask any of you what you were doing or if you were even alive in 1978, but in 1978, our founder was talking about the fact that the information about the package is as important as the package itself. And those sounded like cool words, but nobody really understood what it was. We didn't even start tracking packages until the early 80s. Now, fast forward to 2020 or so, and our current president and CEO talks about the fact that FedEx is at this unique intersection of the physical and digital worlds, right? So now we're finally at the point where that 1978 quote actually makes sense. Now we're bringing it together. And so I would tell you that, yes, there's still going to be, the first 50 years of FedEx is on the left side of this slide. The next 50 years of FedEx and many other companies is actually represented by the entire slide. So yes, we're still going to move packages, but B, there's going to be, the other side of this, there's going to be this digitized version of that package. As I've indicated here, a blockchain tokenized digital twin of that package. Once we can digitize the packages, I don't need to know everything in your package. I'm moving your package, but you're going to want to digitize it. You're going to want to have IP and margins and all kinds of other stuff digitized. I won't need to have access to that, and you won't want me to, and we're fine with that. But the fact that we are going to be able to digitize all these goods moving around the world means a number of things. It means that we can now streamline those processes. I mean, PDFs are a step forward in a lot of these areas, right? And yet here we are talking about blockchain and AI and all the rest of these things. But once we get to the point where we have these digitized, now all these steps that we have that sit between you and me, between supply and demand, when I order something, you've got a broker and a forwarder and a brother-in-law and all these people that sit between us for a slice of the pie. Once we digitize that, it's going to change all of that. When Apple, when somebody in particular can provide trusted data directly to US Customs, then do you still need all those steps along the way? And do you need to stop it when it crosses the port of entry? Do you need a physical port of entry like we always have? The answer is you do not. Now you are a trusted shipper. You've done 5,000 transactions. When you ship it from there, they know exactly who you are. Keep it moving. We saw that collapse in the last couple of years with the pandemic, right? Everything fell flat and everything got stuck at the border, the port of LA, the port of Long Beach. All these ports were just completely stacked up and backed up. A digitized version of all of that is going to dramatically change that and reduce what we would call friction across borders. That's delays, that's paperwork, that's resources, that's all kinds of things from that point of view. And so if we think of the physical and digital worlds, what sits in the middle of that? If there was literally an intersection, we think it's blockchain, we think it's IoT sensors, and we think it's AI. So AI is fantastic, but AI is limited to the source. We're seeing that right now. If somebody talks about ChatGPT, the next comment is going to be, hey, Dale, you need to be careful of that because you don't know where that information is coming from. Completely agree. AI is simply a better engine. I kind of refer to it as a blender. You know, if I used to put all these materials together for my dinner by hand, now I can put it in there and punch the puree button, right? It's going to do that, but it's the same raw materials. If you don't know where those raw materials came from, or if you forgot to wash the potato, it's the same thing. Blockchain and sensors are going to provide the exhaust. The exhaust of those processes is what AI is going to be able to analyze. Now that you've digitized your supply chain, now you can analyze it, you can optimize it with these tools, with AI and other tools, and now you can create predictive models. What will happen? How can I help you improve your supply chain? How can I help other people, even internally, but I can also help you as well? Predictive models, what will happen? Prescriptive models, how can we make it happen? Now we're off to the races, but we think the kind of the trifecta, if you will, of these technologies is actually blockchain, sensors, and AI. Any one of them gives you more than we had previously. Any two of them is better, and all three of them is the trifecta. That's when magic is going to happen, basically, when all these new technologies, and by the way, emerging technologies beyond that as well. So when we talk about the physical versus the digital world, what are we really talking about? Well, we're all consumers, right? Some are in the industry, most are consumers. So you know, okay, well, something I ordered has been picked up. Okay, now it's at the hub, or now it's out for delivery. That's the top world, the physical world from that point of view. The digital world actually looks more like an MRI. There's multiple layers there from that point of view, and I'm going to spend just a second to kind of talk about some of that stuff. So traceability is essentially the same thing as the physical world. It's pickup, it's hub, it's destination, it's all those kinds of things. Then you get into things like chain of custody. We see that a lot with cold chain, so pharmaceuticals and medical and COVID vaccines certainly was an example of that. And that's like the old kind of police procedural that you watch on TV or movies or something like that. Somebody signs something out to somebody else, to somebody else. Little by little, it's getting more efficient. You know, it used to be very manual. Now it's getting more efficient. And then we get into something like sensor-based logistics. So these IoT devices create a pulse. So here's that pickup, origin, hub, delivery at the top. That's traceability and all that stuff. I'm going to put this in my pocket for just a second. The sensors are now going to give us a ton more information, a lot more information. Not where was it 2 hours ago at the hub, but where is it right now? It's at the hub, and it's this item right here. I know exactly where it is. But it's not until we get to blockchain that it actually glues all those data points together, and it creates the story of Dale. It creates the story of David. It creates a Gucci bag or a Rolex watch or a conflict-free diamond. And it's not the same thing. These are complementary data elements, but gluing it together gets you to the provenance, gets you to the pedigree, right? You know exactly where it comes from, whether it's a COVID vaccine or other things from that point of view. And so a lot of people are trying to sprinkle a little blockchain dust on anything and see if it'll grow 6 feet tall. It will not. Blockchain is not going to replace any of the big databases that we have, these big ruggedized databases that move millions of packages a day around the world. It's not going to replace any of those. And honestly, if you had 100 ideas, maybe 1 or 2 might have something to do with blockchain. However, where provenance, where authenticity, where pedigree matters, where you absolutely need to know that is a Gucci bag, that is a conflict-free diamond, that is a Pfizer COVID vaccine, and I can prove it, we think it's going to be transformative. And so that's the key here. Again, as you go deeper and deeper, it's when you finally glue it all together that it actually becomes very interesting. Here's an example of that. The EU is ahead of us in a lot of things, and one of the things that they're talking about right now, you're going to hear more about, is digital product passports, or DPP. And one of the examples that they are working on right now in the EU is for batteries. So we've got more electric cars, we've got more batteries, we've got everything from that point of view. They're going to establish essentially a cradle-to-grave scenario where we know where the battery was manufactured. I bought it in a new car, I traded in that car, you got that car, now you own it, somebody else owns it, or ultimately it's traded in and it's reclaimed or recycled. It's creating what is going to be referred to as a circular economy, a green economy, right? We want to know where those things are, we want to know where they are at all times, and it won't just be about batteries. But batteries is one of the early use cases. There's a deforestation effort. EU is working on a lot of these kinds of things, and again, blockchain in this case is going to connect all those dots. The technologies that we have, blockchain and beyond, the emerging technologies, are going to connect those dots, and we're going to know exactly where that battery came from or where other items came from. And we're going to be able, once we've done that, we're also going to have greater ability to manage it, to optimize it, to analyze it, and to improve it. And so that gets you to some of these green initiatives and some of those kinds of things. We're going to know more and more about where that is. I'm going to wait for that photo. I'm about to change, there you go. And so one of the use cases that we did involved the Canadian government, Public Health Agency of Canada. They came to us and said, look, we want to know that this Pfizer COVID vaccine is actually Pfizer COVID vaccine before we move it into our government facilities and we put it into these injections into our citizens. Can you do that for us? And you can do that at a pretty high level with sensors. Right? Sensors are going to get you to, I picked it up from there and I moved it to there and I can prove all those things. But it can't prove the provenance. It can't prove at the deeper level from that point of view. And so we created a use case that we think is a foundational use case where we got to it. The data was actually memorialized onto an Ethereum blockchain. We attached a sensor to it, and so then once we start with that, then we can move it from point A to point B, and now you have this level of certainty knowing that when it gets to the embassy or it gets to the hospital or the government facility, now it's done. Foundationally, there's a lot of things you can do with that. There's another use case. I'm waving to the streaming folks at this point. I met a couple of colleagues from Memphis this morning. They had to leave, and they're watching it on streaming right now from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is every bit as fantastic as you've ever thought it might be. And we were talking about this use case, and they've got a use case of a thing called St. Jude Global that is focused on curing every child of cancer in the world. And I won't go deep into that because I don't have the time in this from that point of view, but this is the same kind of thing that you could use. You could foundationally create the manufacturing and the quality control data and memorialize that onto a blockchain. You could move it from point A to point B with sensors, and all of that now, again, is memorialized, and now you know for a fact you've got the authentic meds, chemotherapy or other meds from that point of view. And we think the same thing applies to other bio and healthcare and pharma and other examples as well. So let me introduce you to Beth. Beth is a human. I say that with a wink wink because Beth, of course, is a human. But when we think of the word customer and you think of who is your customer or who is FedEx's customer, you don't normally say human because it's kind of assumed, it's kind of implied. However, with smart contracts, that's not necessarily going to be the case for much longer. So Beth is a human, but Beth is also a machine. I'm referring to a smart contract essentially as a machine. And again, many of you know this, smart contracts are essentially a big fancy Excel macro, right? If, then. So if I bring it to you on time, if I keep the right temperature, the right humidity, no shock, no light, then you will pay me. Doesn't sound very transformative. However, it will automate all those processes. You're not going to have all these people tracking. Well, you check it and make sure it was on time, and you check it to the temperature, and you do all these things, and then we'll send it to the payables department, and 40 days later, it's going to come out. Right? All that's going to be automated. So Beth is a human. She can now create these things. One of the transformative pieces about that is that we're going to have shippers and receivers from a FedEx point of view, but some are going to be human and some are going to be machines. So right now, it's kind of a binary thing, and we're actually going to get it into a quadrant. right? So it could be a shipper that's human or a machine, or a receiver that's a human or a machine, and they create kind of a parent-child relationship. So Beth may have 5 or 7 smart contracts working for her. She may say, I'm gonna go out online and I wanna buy this item, so here's the price point. Hey, if you can find this below this price point, purchase 10 of them and move them over to my website and add a margin to them and sell them. We will never know that she does that. She may live at the end of a cul-de-sac and she may not have no inventory in her garage. She may be doing all that, and that's fundamentally very different for many sales organizations and kind of Web 2 scenarios where I'm going to a physical location and I call on you once every month and I do all these kinds of things. It's going to fundamentally change some of those things. Almost nothing in our life exists without standardization. There are traffic lights and 4-way stop signs and the electrical grid and all the rest of these things. We are founding members of the Blockchain and Transport Alliance. That goes back to 2017. We are focused on open source and royalty-free data standards. FedEx is a founding member. UPS is a founding member. We just recently merged with the Global Blockchain Business Council, and I'm the chairman of that entity. And we are focused on being on global harmonization of standards. It is not at all sexy. It's exactly as boring as it sounds, but it won't scale without it. It won't scale. So we're working together to figure out how can we call these things? How can we create a common language that I refer to it, you refer to it, we all understand it in global commerce. And so there's a big effort at this point to do that. But we think it's going to take, as I've mentioned before, we think it's going to take a co-opetition. We think it's going to take this notion where you and I as competitors can actually find common ground. So when you think of a competitor, you think of, well, that's my competitor, right? So A, it's a competitor, we compete here, and we differentiate here. So here's a slide that walks our way through that. So value appropriation, basically where we compete is value appropriation. That's in the marketplace. Where we differentiate, well, we do this and they do that, whatever the case may be. I actually believe that the middle of this is value creation, and I think it's fundamentally going to change things in the next 10 or 15 years. I work for a very mature company. If you can get a 0.5% or 1% improvement year over year, it adds up quickly. This is actually uncharted territory from that point of view. But most people don't learn about working with their competitor in business school or on their first week of new employee orientation or whatever the case may be. It's just not, it's like, wait a second, don't we have antitrust laws? Yes, we do, and they're critical, and they're important, and we don't get close to them. We draw a hard line in the sand. We don't talk about pricing. We don't talk about a number of other things. And however, it's not about where we compete. It's about where we can agree. So where can we agree? FedEx, UPS, and DHL can agree, I mentioned earlier, where we can reduce friction across borders. We win, our customers win, global trade also wins. We saw this happen organically in the pandemic. We might have been arguing over a back fence about our favorite sports teams or something like that, but the second the pandemic happened, we all dropped what we were doing and we were focused on getting ventilators and PPE to people around the world that we will never meet. And yet we figured out a way to agree on certain things like this. And so the challenge becomes, in this case, co-opetition actually appeared for the first time in the early 1900s at a company level. There are fantastic industry examples of this. 1830, they came up with the railroad, the width of railroad tracks, 4 feet, 8.5 inches, by the way, in case you want to win any trivia contests. And why? Because the tracks couldn't connect unless they did these things, right? So there's wonderful examples of that. Or schedules. The railroads actually came up with the current time zones because they realized that sundown in my town and sundown in your town aren't the same time, so they had to work their way through that. Lots of examples at an industry level. Air industry, auto industry, great examples of this over the last 100 or more years, couple of 100 years in some cases. But we've never had, they weren't dealing with global technology. So this is different. This is not like the railroad industry just working together to figure out how to do something like that. This is a global technology, and we've only had one global technology so far, and that's the internet. And the internet actually was a really small number of people that established, a very small number of engineers and scientists that came up with TCP, IP, HTTP, the protocols that work underneath that to make things human readable and various things like that. In this case, we've got a global technology, but we aren't going to have 5 or 7 people. We can't solve it in this room and just say, oh, well, he solved this and he solved this and we're all just going to use it. That's where I get to. It's going to take a global village, a pro-competitive global village, to work through this. And it's not intuitive, it's not taught at business school, and it's something that is challenging essentially conventional wisdom. So with that, I will stop. I thank you very much for your time today, and we may have a moment or two for some questions. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, the question was around standards. How do they exist at this point in essentially a Web 2, Web 3 scenario? Standards are a common data language at this point. It could be a country code. Do we agree on that? It could be an electronic bill of lading. Again, it's not very sexy at this point, but basically we've got a number of standards entities. We've got ISO, we've got United Nations, we've got World Customs, we've got a bunch of those things, and the effort that we were working on right now to globally harmonize that is to push them all together and say, wait a second, we actually agree on country codes. Let's agree, let's lock in on that, let's all nod to that one, and yet there may be gaps in other areas as well. We just think it's going to be foundational to get us to Web 3. And by the way, once we get to Web 3, I'm not limiting this to blockchain. It may or may not have anything to do, but it's going to help us digitize global commerce, and it will get us to a more paperless scenario moving product around the world. And that's a foundational kind of common language. So anyway, anything else at this point for I wrap up? One more, and then I'll wrap up. Yes, sir.
So do you see the biggest impact on the kind of origin shipper side or the rapidly growing like last mile city? There's 5. When I was a kid, there was 1 FedEx UPS truck each day. Now there's 2 on our street in Brooklyn every day.
Right.
At a time.
Right.
2 trucks. Do you see the impact on that? Which end? Do you see
Well, I think ultimately it has to be end to end. We're going to have to figure out where we start that whole thing. The technology is actually pretty straightforward. The use case that I talked about with memorializing things and all that is actually pretty straightforward. It's the scalability that's the challenge. We can build a global supply chain blockchain internally within FedEx and it just won't work because you guys won't use it. You're going to have, that's where we're going to have to get to this broader conversation where look to your left and look to your right. These are your teammates. Whether you realize it or not, whether you've even met them or not, these are your teammates. So it's going to have to ultimately go everywhere from that point of view. And I think some foundational use cases early on are going to help get it started. I think AI might help kick it in because AI is going to need source. It's going to need truth, essentially, or source information underneath that to make it scale. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.
Claim your official proof of participation in Rare Evo 2023. Whether you attend physically or tune in on the live stream, you get a free NFT painted by Brendan O'Connell live from our Expo Hall floor, and you get whitelisted for the Rare Perks NFT presale. By claiming, you will be entered into a giveaway of multiple rewards, including the original one-of-one physical painting by Brendan, along with exclusive access and opportunities for Rare Evo 2024, including, but not limited to, free general admission and VIP passes, a 10x10 booth, workshop space, and more.